The road to Kursk wasn't a straight line of tanks. It was a crossroads of fear, hope, and hard numbers where one misread calculation could break an empire's spine. In the spring of 1943, Germany stood at a strategic precipice. The winter had been cruel. Stalingrad had swallowed an army, and with it the aura of invincibility. In the skies over the Reich, Allied bombers stitched fiery patterns across German cities. In North Africa, the Axis front collapsed, and on the oceans, the U-boats were losing their shadow war. Berlin's high command faced a truth it could neither outflank nor camouflage. Fighting on multiple fronts was bleeding the Wehrmacht white. Yet, Hitler still believed in the decisive blow. A single action that would seize the initiative, shock the Soviets, and restore strategic freedom before an Allied landing in the West changed the calculus forever. Kursk, a bulging salient jutting into German lines, seemed to offer that chance. The idea was austere and simple: draw the Red Army into a prepared killing ground, grind its armored reserves to dust, and ensure that in 1943 the Soviets could not seize the offensive. If the Red Army's spearheads broke on German steel, the Wehrmacht might shorten its line, regain operational tempo, and husband resources for what Berlin hoped would be a failed Anglo-American bid to open a second front. Only then, Hitler reasoned, could Germany pivot back east with force. But behind the rhetoric of resolve lay hesitation. The Führer's orders spoke of avoiding risks while seeking limited strikes, a contradiction that revealed his own strategic anxiety. The Wehrmacht's armored formations needed time to reconstitute. New heavy tanks, the Tigers and Panthers, promised to redress technical inferiority. Yet their numbers were small and their teething troubles real. Intelligence suggested the Red Army had recovered faster than expected, replacing men, tanks, and guns with alarming speed. Even so, the German theory of victory at Kursk leaned on a familiar logic: concentrated shock, rapid penetration, and encirclement. The same formula that had worked so brilliantly in 1941, applied now against a tougher, wiser opponent. Thus the decision to launch Operation Citadel became both a necessity and a wager. Attrit the enemy, deny him the initiative, prove to a watching world that the Eastern Front remained Germany's to script. The stage was set not by hubris alone, but by a grim understanding: unless the Red Army was blunted now, the next summer might arrive with Germany already on the back foot and out of time. The Soviet Union read the battlefield differently. If Kursk was a lure, they would turn it into a labyrinth. The salient's shoulders and approaches were transformed by men and women who worked through mud and shrapnel's promise, carving trenches into the earth until the land itself became a weapon. 6 defensive belts, layered like armor, stretched across the countryside. Behind them stood a reserve, the steppe front, poised to counterstrike once the blow had been absorbed. This was defense not as a pause, but as a prelude. Engineers seeded the ground with 1,000,000 mines, and where the Red Army lacked steel, it employed cunning. Tank strongpoints were built like stubborn knots in a rope. Riflemen with armor, piercing rounds, engineers with satchel charges, fought 10 anti-tank guns and a few tanks dug in hull down so only their turrets peaked above the soil. Artillery, massed, disciplined, and lavishly supplied, became the backbone of the plan, with densities reaching up to 70 guns per kilometer in key sectors. The idea was brutal and precise: bleed the spearhead, break the pace, and force the Wehrmacht to fight attritional battles on ground the Soviets chose. There was fear, too. The Tiger tank, captured and studied, wore a reputation as thick as its armor. Crews were drilled to aim at vision slits and commander hatches, to blind the beast if they couldn't kill it. Partisans behind German lines struck rails and bridges, trying to starve Citadel before it was born. Meanwhile, Stavka argued over initiative: strike first to spoil Citadel, or absorb the attack and then counterpunch. Zhukov and Vasilevsky persuaded Stalin to hold the line at first. The decision married patience with preparation. It also demanded discipline. Resist the urge to charge tigers with T-34s across open fields, force the enemy to enter the belts and die by increments. On paper it was elegant. In practice, it would be chaos under the summer sun, where dust clouds and Stuka sirens stitched the sky. But the core held. Kursk would not be a frontier to be defended. It would be a funnel to trap momentum. And behind the belts, like a coiled spring, stood the counteroffensive plan. Operation Kutuzov to crush the Oryol salient in the north, Operation Rumyantsev to smash south toward Kharkiv. The Red Army would invite the storm, and then follow it back to its source. Timing killed Citadel as surely as Soviet fire. The operation slipped from April to May, then June, and finally into early July. Each delay, born from caution, Mediterranean anxieties, weather, or hope for more tigers and panthers, strengthened the other side. As German staffs assembled their assault, Soviet entrenchments deepened, minefields multiplied, artillery parks grew denser. What began as an attempt to preempt Soviet initiative drifted into an attack against a prepared fortress. Misjudgment compounded the calendar's cruelty. German intelligence underestimated Soviet strength across the salient. On paper, the Wehrmacht counted roughly 900,000 men and around 3,900 tanks and assault guns committed seconds, including formations that would not all attack. Facing them, the Red Army commanded millions, with nearly 9,000 armored vehicles available and artillery in mind-numbing quantity. The German plan assumed rapid breach of two belts within 48 hours, a push to link northern and southern pincers, and the classic encirclement. That assumption made sense only if Soviet resistance cracked at the pace of 1941, not 1943. There were technical hopes, of course. Heavy armor and long-barreled guns promised overmatch on open ground. Luftwaffe superiority in certain sectors could chop up Soviet reserves on the march. But the battlefield the Germans met was a culvert of mines and fire sacks, where every advance exacted wheels, tracks, and time. Coordination between panzers and infantry, so critical to combined arms success, wavered under shelling and confusion. Even where breakthroughs came, they were incomplete, exposing flanks to counterattacks that bled momentum. The force ratio mattered not simply in numbers, but in replacement math. Germany fought at the edge of its logistical envelope. The Soviets fought nearer their railheads and in terrain they had calibrated in advance. To the east, factories turned out T-34s with factory-line relentlessness. In German depots, spares for new heavy tanks lagged, mechanical gremlins colonized ambition. As the start date drew near, the Wehrmacht found itself launching not the decisive preemption envisioned in March, but a narrowed window assault against a reinforced and fully briefed enemy. In the calculus of war, delay can be a weapon. The Red Army used time as clay, molding Kursk into a shape that punished German doctrine. By July, the arithmetic of Citadel had shifted. Even tactical brilliance would struggle to yield the operational decision Berlin required. The Germans would cut, but not cleave, strike, but not shatter. And in a war of attrition, not enough is another word for defeat. When the summer guns finally spoke on July 5, 1943, the battlefield answered with contradictions. The Soviets tried to catch the attackers in their jump-off positions with preemptive artillery. The effect was far less than later legend would claim. The Luftwaffe mauled Soviet aircraft in the opening exchanges. Yet on the ground, in both north and south, the Germans did what they had promised. They burst through the first belt, then the second, stunning Soviet commanders who had expected longer delay. The arrows moved, The clock ticked, the attrition meter spun. But inside that progress were the micro-fractures. Minefields ate into tempo. Anti-tank fire chewed at the spearheads. Tactical coordination sometimes faltered at the critical moment. Infantry clearing crests while tanks lingered at the foot, leaving hard-won gains exposed to counterattack. The Tigers, when present and running, imposed their will. Soviet crews learned quickly that frontal slugging matches were suicide and shifted to instructions that prioritized blinding and isolating the beasts. Orders followed. Conserve tanks, counterattack only when enemy dispositions were disorganized, and favor killing infantry and soft vehicles to pry apart combined arms teams. In the south, the struggle metastasized into armored collision. Soviet attempts to encircle German spearheads produced furious local battles where terrain, dust, and the geometry of hedgerows and gullies collapsed grand strategy into duels at 300 meters. Losses spiked. On some days, Soviet armor losses dwarfed German tallies, evidence that tactical overmatch could exist even as the larger operational tide turned against Berlin. In the north, Model's 9th Army ground itself down against Belt 3, where mines were augmented by shells wired as charges and artillery concentration made forward movement a lesson in humility. The paradox-hardened German excellence on the tactical plane did not translate into operational decision. Every kilometer gained cost time, and time was the currency the Wehrmacht lacked. Each breach opened onto yet another line, another tangle of guns and wire. The Luftwaffe could savage Soviet attacks and reserves, but not everywhere, not always, and not at the density needed to unravel the entire defense. What Citadel needed was acceleration, what it found was drag. By the second week, even improving positions in the south could not mask the reality that the encirclement schedule was evaporating. Momentum, once a German trademark, had been captured by the depth of Soviet preparation and the tyranny of the clock. The true hinge of the campaign came not only at Prokhorovka's fields, but across the map where Soviet counteroffensives ignited. On July 12, Operation Kutuzov crashed into the Oryol salient, drawing off German reserves and sealing the fate of Citadel as surely as any tank duel. The northern pincer, already blunted, now had to bleed forces sideways, surrendering the possibility of linking with the southern thrust. Strategy punished tactics. You can win local fights and still lose the war that day. Prokhorovka itself remains a battlefield of narratives. Soviet portrayals long framed it as a triumphant charge that halted the SS armored corps. Modern research points to a different picture. Ferocious Soviet bravery meeting prepared German anti-tank fire and counterblows, with catastrophic Red Army losses and limited German damage that was largely recoverable. In the chaos of that morning, with orders accelerated and formations colliding in dust and smoke, the result was not the decisive breakthrough Stavka hoped for, but a tactical defensive success for the Germans that could not be converted into operational salvation. The myth endured because nations need symbols, the reality mattered because armies need truth. Meanwhile, the logic of depth asserted itself. With Oryol threatened, with reserves pulled and re-tasked, with attrition tallying up, Citadel ceased to be a tool for German initiative and became a fight for posture. Commanders in the south pressed on, penetrating a third belt by July 11, yet the encirclement dream was already dissolving. Hitler's conversations turned to Sicily and the Mediterranean, used as a rationale to end the offensive even as units in the east remained in place for days more. However one passes the politics, the battlefield arithmetic was plain. The window had closed. Operational art prefers clarity, but war is a fog of overlapping truths. The Germans could point to kill ratios and stabilized local fronts, even a stalwart stand at Prokhorovka. The Soviets could point to Kutuzov's advance, to the preservation of strategic initiative, to a defense that had absorbed the blow and was now transmuting into attack. The decisive element was not a single ridge or village. It was the strategic current set in motion by timing, mass, and preparation. From July 12 onward, the river ran one way, away from Citadel and toward the counteroffensives that would roll the front west. When the guns cooled and the maps were redrawn in August, the consequences of Kursk radiated far beyond the salient. Germany had failed to destroy Soviet forces, failed to shorten its line, failed to seize prisoners for labor, and, most damning, failed to prevent the Red Army from taking the offensive. Belgorod and Oryol fell on August 5, celebrated in Moscow by a thunder of guns. Kharkiv became untenable and was abandoned in the night of August 22-23. The Wehrmacht, once the author of summer blitzkriegs, now bled through retreats, its capacity to replace losses shrinking as industrial and logistical strains tightened like a noose. Morale shifted with the front. In early 1943, many Germans still believed a military victory in the east was possible. After Kursk, doubt seeped into barracks and living rooms. On the other side, Soviet confidence hardened. The Red Army had survived the hammer and now wielded it, driving over 1,000 miles in the next 20 months to the gates of Berlin. For civilians trapped in the occupied zones, the change was darker. As the Wehrmacht pulled back through Ukraine and beyond, occupation policies hardened. Reprisals and forced evacuations stalking roads already haunted by loss. Kursk was not only a military hinge, it was a human one. Strategically, the lesson was stark delay, underestimation, and insufficient mass had turned a would-be preemption into an attritional defeat. Tactical prowess and fearsome machines could not compensate for the simple math of depth and replacement. The Red Army's method, defend in depth, attrit the spearheads, counterattack with mass, proved not glamorous but decisive. After Kursk, Germany would never again launch a summer offensive in the east. The initiative had passed hands, and it would not return. History often compresses complexity into symbols. Tigers bogged in minefields, T-34s cresting ridges at dawn, a commander staring at a map covered in pins that refuse to meet. But the truth of Kursk is a system truth. A demonstration that planning, preparation, and patience can blunt even a deadly blade when wielded at the wrong time against the wrong target. If this deep dive helped you see Kursk with clearer eyes, I'd love to hear your take. What surprised you most? The myths around Prokhorovka, or the sheer scale of Soviet preparation? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more rigorously researched history in your feed, like, comment, and share this video so others can join the discussion.